hey, doc, realistically, what are we looking at here? And he said, typically in this situation, I would say 6 months. And I was like, okay, that's pretty serious.
Welcome to Believe in Progress, the American Association for Cancer Research Foundation podcast. Join us and be inspired by the incredible stories of those who have faced cancer with strength and resilience, and the medical professionals who are working tirelessly to find new treatments and ultimately a cure. Believe in Progress isn't just about the science of cancer. It's about the human side of this disease. Together, we can make progress in the fight against cancer and bring hope to those who need it most. Welcome to the Believe in Progress podcast, brought to you by the American Association for Cancer Research. I'm your host, Mitch Stoller, Chief Philanthropic Officer at AACR. Today, we have an extraordinary guest who brings both humor and heart to his journey with brain cancer. Bryan Bishop is a New York Times bestselling author, comedian, podcast host, and cancer advocate. Diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor at age 30, Bryan has used his voice to raise awareness, inspire resilience, and support cancer research. His memoir, Shrinkage, Manhood, Marriage, and the Tumor That Tried to Kill Me, captures his story with both poignancy and humor. Bryan, it's truly a great pleasure and an honor to have you here today. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very excited to chat with you, Mitch. And after that intro, I don't know if I can live up to it, but I'll do my best.
I have a feeling you will. Are you an LA guy?
No, my wife is actually from LA, one of the few, but I grew up in the Bay Area, San Francisco, which maybe to other parts of the country and world seem like more or less the same thing, but I can tell you it's not.
Have you always kind of been in the show business or in comedy and things of that sort?
Some might say I've never been in comedy, but growing up, I was actually really, this is very nerdy and very outdated, but I was very into journalism. I really wanted to be a journalist. That was like my life's goal for my teen years. I think I started writing for my local paper when I was probably I think it was 7th grade, 6th or 7th grade. I started writing articles for my local paper covering my middle school athletic teams, and filing a story every night the team played. I loved it so much. I read, I was the 13-year-old who had a subscription to the San Francisco Chronicle.
Wow.
And read the stories and the updates every day and the A's and the Giants. And for many years wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be the next great sports journalist. I even was a print journalism major at USC for a couple of years. And I just, honestly, I really just got burnt out. I mean, doing, journalists get burnt out for doing it, 10 years. Doing it for 10 years in your teen years is a lot.
Yeah.
And it just got to be too much.
Did you cover professional collegiate sporting events?
Oh God, no.
No.
By that point, you're pretty low on the totem pole when you get to the early years in college. So I wrote for the Daily Trojan, I guess it would have been,
okay.
A few articles here and there. But I just wasn't, what I mean? At a certain point when the thing isn't doing it
Sure.
for you, and it wasn't doing it for me.
When you got out of college, what did you end up going into?
I switched majors, I think, in college to creative writing because I still loved writing. I still loved being creative, and it ended up being a great decision. It just taught me so many fundamentals of storytelling, which can be applied, it turns out, to radio, when you're doing talk radio and things, which I ended up doing many years later, in my mid-20s, late 20s. But those fundamentals of storytelling and story structure and character development, you learn them, and then you can apply them to whatever you're doing, telling a story about being a journalism major or whatever it is. That those storytelling fundamentals and foundations are super helpful.
Is it hard to break into talk radio?
No, it's virtually impossible.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to when I was piecing together my life in my early 20s, I was fortunate to end up at the syndicated radio show Loveline, screening calls, the lowest rung on the totem pole. And there's a mixed metaphor, but you get it. The lowest spot in the radio hierarchy. screening calls. And so for their they'll call in talk show. And so I was fortunate to meet Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew. And I guess, being a young hustler in his 20s, I impressed them with my work ethic and stuck around. And radio, a lot of times, that's half the battle, just
Right.
showing up, working hard, and impressing the bosses to an extent, because radio, at least at that time, was an area that a lot of people ended up in. You know what I mean? They didn't so much try to go into it, or if they did, it's kind of like stand-up comedy in the sense that, yes, you have to be funny, and a good performer and all that stuff, but the lifestyle engenders a lot of people who maybe aren't cut out for it. Like, oh, great, I can sleep until noon and like stay up late and tell jokes with my friends and have a drink and then go to bed at 2 a.m. or whatever it is. Like, that's an attractive lifestyle to a lot of people.
Right.
And so I think they end up gravitating to certain industries for the wrong reasons.
Did you do morning radio, or did it all like?
I eventually did, yeah. So fast forward through working menial jobs, all sorts of places, but in radio also, screening calls, which is where you get your start. And I eventually got a chance to be on air and for the Adam Carolla show, which was a morning show, taking over for Howard Stern in 2006. And that lasted for almost 3 years.
Is this when Stern went to Sirius?
Yeah, it's exactly right. When Howard Stern went to Sirius satellite radio, his very large footprint in traditional radio had to be filled, at least in the eyes of Viacom, CBS Radio, and so they hired Adam Carolla as one of the replacements. Because it was a full-time job, a replacement on the West Coast. And that's the show that I ended up being his wacky sidekick.
When I was a young guy living in the Washington, D.C. area, I used to listen to Stern on, it was DC 101, rock and roll station. Yeah. And
I listened to Stern. That's why I interrupt you. I was a big fan. I listened to him in the mornings. He was syndicated on a station in the Bay Area called Live 105.
Yeah.
And it was Stern in the mornings, and it was Loveline at night. So I got the full gamut of great talk radio.
He was it back in the day, for I guess I was in my mid-20s or something like that, and that demographic was perfect for him, and now obviously I just heard him do a great interview with Springsteen on Sirius.
Oh, nice.
And it was really good, really good.
Cool.
So take us to your diagnosis. I think 30 years old when you were first diagnosed.
Yeah, I was actually, so we had just the morning radio show I just alluded to had just been canceled. I mean, the whole station flipped, leaving us sort of out in the cold. And so it was, let's try and set the stage here. It was early 2009. If you can cast your memory back there, that was the housing crisis.
Yes.
People were getting laid off left and right.
Tough times.
Our station flipped formats and, left a whole bunch of people out, without work. And towards the end of our run, I was feeling these weird symptoms. I chalked it up to, I'm getting up early at 4 a.m. I'm just not getting enough sleep, or my diet's terrible because I'm working in 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. I got to figure this out. But I would get like numbness, like in the corner of my mouth, or like up here on like my scalp, or certain parts of my face would feel numb, and I would have trouble articulating certain words and sounds. But again, I was like, I'm sleep deprived. You can always write it off. And things got worse to the point where I remember one day, it's a story that I've told before, that I was hanging out with some other unemployed friends who had recently lost their jobs, and we're just having a couple of beers. In fact, it was Bud Light. It was a light beer that shouldn't have taken its toll. But I think after a couple of, literally 2 Bud Lights over the course of an hour, I'm like, I got to pee. And I stood up and I totally lost my balance and just fell over in my friend's living room. And it was at that point that I realized that, something's amiss here. There's enough going on that I should probably look into or have an expert look into my neurological situation. And long story short, I was engaged at the time, due to be married in 2 months, and my fiance jumped into action and said, "We're getting you looked at right away." And we saw a specialist through a series of tests, MRIs, et cetera, eventually figured out that I did have a brain tumor, a brainstem glioma, to be exact.
Where were you treated?
Well, that's the thing. When I was diagnosed, it was, I'll kindly say, maybe just not the best doctor and medical team available to me. But again, I was 29, 30 years old, I guess, at the time. Having never been in that situation, I think it's very common for a lot of people to not know that they can advocate for themselves in the form of getting a second opinion,
Right.
or finding a better doctor, frankly. Thankfully, that's what we did. And we ended up, the initial doctor, I'll never forget, when we were diagnosed, he's giving us all this sort of medical jargon that we're not quite digesting. And I was like, "Hey, doc, realistically, what are we looking at here?" And he said, "Typically in this situation, I would say 6 months."
Right.
And I was like, "Okay, that's pretty serious." You heard the expression, broke out in a cold sweat.
Yes.
Well, I finally knew what that meant, because, I got the chills, not the chills like, when you watch a scary movie.
I know what you
Like
mean.
literally, my body temperature dropped, but I was sweating. So I'm like, oh, I'm enjoying a cold sweat right now. My first thought was, holy crap. But my second thought was, well, that's not going to be me. And whether or not that was a coping mechanism or just trait denial, I don't know. But I always had this, what people identified as, you're so positive. It's like, well, I mean, yeah, maybe, but at the same time, that's just how I felt.
Yeah.
So we eventually, I think within a few days, found a highly recommended doctor out here, a surgeon, actually, a neurosurgeon. I don't know if your audience may know who he is, because obviously who you appeal to, but it was Dr. Keith Black. He's a pretty well-known surgeon, I guess, kind of rock star brain surgeon, which was neither here nor there, because as he explained to us when we met him, he's like, "Your tumor is inoperable. We can't go in there and get it, because it's nestled amongst a bunch of cranial nerves, which, if you nick one, in the surgical process, you could come out of that without the ability to blink or breathe or swallow, and that could do major damage. So not anywhere near worth the risk. It's never been done, and we're not going to do it. But, I have a great team. He said, I have a great team who can, help you and give you some treatment and give you a fighting chance. And that's all we really wanted. So we ended up with Dr. Black's team. I don't know if it's not necessarily under him, it's more like adjacent to him, because these are doctors who specialize in inoperable tumors. And my doctor ended up being Dr. Jeremy Rudnick at Cedars-Sinai.
Uh-huh.
And he's been my doctor ever since. This was 2009 when we met. It's been 15 years.
Amazing.
And, it's gotten to the point where, we've gone through so much. We've been with each other, so to speak, for so many life events and so many ups and downs, that he's much more of a friend than he is a doctor at this point.
So did you just finally get approved for a drug that you need, or a medicine that you need to take? And I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Voranigo?
Right? Voranigo, yes.
Close.
It's brand new, so there's no reason why you should know that. But yes, so fast forward to, I guess, last year. It was last fall. It was 2023, August-ish. And my doctor, Dr. Rudnick, says, "Hey, there's this new drug coming out that the results of their clinical trials are just off the charts. They're saying this could be a game-changing drug for people specifically with your type of tumor. So I really want to get you on it. But the trick is, it only works for people with a specific mutation for your type of tumor. And he's like, the only way we can know is to actually biopsy the tumor. Now, if you remember back to 2009, not you, but me, 2009, the doctors, every doctor I spoke with told me that your tumor is inoperable. It's amongst a bunch of cranial nerves, and biopsying it is even too big of a risk. We can't do that. Again, God forbid we nick something there and you have lifelong problems. So biopsy's off the table. Well, come 2023, technology has advanced quite a bit to where they can do a needle biopsy and avoid many of the risks that had been present. Not only that, my doctor explains to me, it's like your tumor has ever so subtly shifted over the years to where now the part of it extends into the medulla, and he's like, that's a much less risky area to biopsy. So we could realistically get literally a gram of tumor tissue out of your medulla and biopsy it and see if you're eligible for this new drug.
Still a serious biopsy, right?
Oh yeah, completely.
Yeah.
But I consulted with him, consulted with the actual doctor who'd be doing the procedure, and he's like, I've been doing these now for a couple of years, and with great success, and I think you're a great candidate for this. So took the leap, got the 1 gram of brain tissue sequenced and all sorts of tests, and it came back that it did in fact have one of the mutations that made it eligible for this new drug. As you probably know, or at least can imagine, it takes quite a process to get these drugs approved by the FDA. I remember footnotes to all of this. The company that made the drug reached out to me earlier this is late 2024 to record this. They reached out to me at the beginning of the year, like January, 11 months ago, saying, hey, we got this big new drug that we're super excited about, and it's in the approval process right now. We're hoping to get it approved in the next month or so. Would you be interested in delivering a speech at our big unveiling event or whatever? I'm like, yeah, sounds great. That would be in early spring maybe. It took until last month for the FDA to approve the medication. So it was a long process. And of course, no one knows. I check with my doctor every month or so. And he's like, I have no idea. But it finally got approved. Well, that's the thing. The medication got approved by the FDA, which means now insurance companies can be the gatekeeper to who gets the medication. Gotcha. So of course my doctor submitted right away to get me on. Of course I was denied. Of course the insurance company needed all sorts of documentation from me, like saying, oh yeah, my doctor is an approved representative for an appeal. Of course they are. Why wouldn't they be? But long story short, yes, I started the medication on the 1st of this month. I'm 14 days in, and it's a once daily pill.
Okay. I asked you the question be based on that, the battle that people have to go through sometimes just to get approved for a drug that could be life sustaining and
ridiculous.
And I know personally, my family, my wife, we just battled to get a drug approved as well, and it was hard, and I can only imagine what many people go through that maybe not have the resources and the wherewithal to be able to do this kind of thing.
You're 100% right. I kvetch obviously about the process, but sadly my case is about as smooth as it gets. Appeal and whatever, and I have found over the years that a lot of it really boils down to your medical team, how they, their ability to fight for you and go to bat for you and appeal. And it's such a, that could be a separate podcast episode that I'm not equipped to talk about because I'm an expert, but the process and the vagaries that we find ourselves dealing with are absurd.
Yeah.
So I count myself as one of the lucky ones, and I definitely sympathize greatly with people who have to go through a much tougher process.
Do you talk to cancer survivors and cancer patients? Do you do some peer counseling with people?
So the answer is yes, and it's taken on so many forms over the years. I've done tons of public talks and speeches and speaking at corporations and organizations.
Mm-hmm.
I've done that. I was the first ever chairman of the National Brain Tumor Society's LA Brain Tumor Walk, their 5K.
Yep.
I did it the first year, and I ended up doing it 3 years in a row. They told me like, oh, usually people do it for 1 year, but I ended up doing it for 3 years in a row. And then on the micro level, I would, especially when I was on the Carolla show, which had quite a listenership at the time, I would get emails and people reaching out all the time, like, hey, my husband, got diagnosed with this, or my dad, or whatever. Like, it ranged from, can you send them a copy of your book, which I happily did. I'd write a personalized message,
mm-hmm.
or sometimes I would talk to people on the phone or chat with email people. One of the things I learned through this whole process is how the importance of community and having someone there to talk to and someone to listen beyond, your family or loved ones. Like, just, you're going through a lot and you want to express that, and you want to have someone maybe who just to listen, or someone who's been there. And I was happy to be that person. I even went through a series of circumstances. A woman reached out to me about her husband who'd been diagnosed, and he was at Cedars in the same ward that I was in, the same wing for outpatient therapy after he had just had some surgery. And I went and visited him. I showed up and as a surprise to him,
nice.
and sat with him for a little bit while he was doing some therapy. Nice. And for me, everything was on the table. I look at it in a weird way as, I will have this unpayable spiritual debt, for the rest of my life, being, the lucky one who made it. There are many, many, many people in my position who were not lucky enough to, still be here. And the fact that I am, I try not to ever take it for granted, and I try to, pay it forward every time I can.
I know some people that have not made it, that hit that 6-month wall, if you will. I was fortunate to hear one of your talks, and I think it was to the National Brain Tumor Society. And one thing that really caught my ear was your message of hope. You really talked a lot about hope, and I was wondering if you could talk to our audience a little bit about that, and how that kind of, I don't know, filters through your being, if you will.
I'm fairly confident you saw the keynote address I probably gave at the American Brain Tumor Association last year.
Yes.
But yeah, hope was a big theme, not just because it was the theme of coincidentally, of their actual conference, Meeting Hope Head On. At the end of the day, it'd be nice to have, your doctors and your medical team promise you a lot of things and tell you they can fix this and fix that, and you'll be on your feet as good as new. It'd be nice, but at the same time, that's not always realistic. I think I can't speak for everyone in my position or everyone, who's affected by cancer, but I can say a large number of those people just want hope. They just want to be told that, yeah, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, or there's a path to victory, or we have a plan. Even if your cancer is the worst kind and the most aggressive, and it's going to be curtains in 6 months. Hey, you know what? Here's what we're going to do. Here's the plan. Here's a little bit of hope, and maybe it's not a guarantee of success, but it goes a long way when you know that there are people fighting on your behalf who see the same goals and path as you do.
Bryan, you alluded to this a little earlier. We were talking a little bit about family and support systems, and your wife Christy has been with you since, as you said, I guess you were engaged when you were first diagnosed. But talk to me a little bit about how important that support is in a cancer battle.
Without being too dramatic about it,
Be dramatic as you want.
I wouldn't be here without my wife, then fiance, now wife, Christy. In so many ways. I mean, this is a superwoman of a person who, there's so many iterations of the incredible caregiving. No, I don't think I'm unique to this. I think
Right.
a lot of people experience this,
Yes.
which is whether or not it's obviously the emotional support, that's obvious, but also like the physical support. Like when I was, there was a long stretch of time, especially in 2009, where had to use a walker full time just to get around our apartment, let alone, out in the world. And I was in a wheelchair for a short period of time. And even ever since, I've recovered to a certain degree, but I'll always be, compromised from what I was before treatment. And her physically picking up the slack, it's a form of emotional support, knowing there's someone there who can, physically, literally pick up the slack and carry the load. I hesitate to say it's gotten harder, but it's gotten more pronounced with, we have a daughter. We have an 8-year-old daughter who we love so much, but she's a handful in a good way, but I mean, it requires physical attention, and there's only so much that I can do, unfortunately. So, my wife picks up all the slack, and I look at it as my job to overcompensate in other areas. You know what I mean? Whether it's with emotional support or mental, taking the load off her as much as I can. So, taking care of the caregiver is a big theme of our lives and our journey, and making sure that those people, whether they're wives or husbands or parents or kids, for their elderly parents who are diagnosed, get the recognition they deserve. But beyond that, also, I mean, recognition is nice, but also the support they need, because they're going through it too.
And Christy spoke at that conference as well. I listened to some of her talk, and very passionate and real superstar there, right?
Yeah, she's great. It was that was my idea. Thank you.
Oh.
When the ABTA reached out to asked me to be their keynote speaker, I was so honored. And at a certain point, I was like, my wife is a very accomplished, articulate public speaker. She's done large presentations for many years, and her perspective on the caregiver's angle would be really valuable, I think, to your talk. So maybe we could carve out a little bit of time to have her give her perspective, and then it ended up being a great.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about the book Shrinkage. How did it come about? How'd you get that title? All the above.
Yeah, I wish it's a great title. I wish I could take credit for it. My editor over at Macmillan came up with the title, and like any great idea, as soon as I heard it, I was like, yeah, that's great, that's good, that's much better than I could have come up with. So we went with that. The idea was, I guess, born out of necessity, because a friend, an associate, a listener of our show, is a book agent, and he had recently sold a book by our other co-host, Teresa Strasser, a very funny book called Exploiting My Baby. And he reached out to me one day. He's like, hey, man, I think you have a great story, and I think there's a market out there for it. So I was like, great, see what you can do. And he, long story short, he comes back and he's like, here's how you write a proposal, here's how you write an outline, et cetera, et cetera. And sadly, a lot of it, as much of it is about your presence and your social media following as it is about your ability to write. Thankfully, I think I had both, thanks to my many years of journalism and creative writing. And so they sold the idea, and now I had to write a book.
Right.
And so I've said before how at the time I really had no expectations beyond, hey, here's a book that our audience will find interesting because they know my story and they know me, and maybe I can make a few people chuckle, and pretty modest expectations. It turned out to have a bit of a life of its own. People really responded to the story. It became a New York Times bestseller, which to this day blows my mind.
Congratulations.
Never in my life did I think I would be a New York Times bestselling author, and yet here we are. But to this day, I get emails and tweets and people reaching out all the time, saying, "Hey man, your book, it really helped, my dad, or my brother or whatever. They were diagnosed. I didn't know what to do." People just want to feel like they're doing something a lot of the time, like, taking action against this horrible thing, because you feel so ineffectual. Your sister gets diagnosed with whatever, and you're like, I can't do anything about it. I live halfway across the country, and I love them so much, but I'm not. So I got people saying, "Hey, I sent them your book, and it really helped," and that was incredible. And I never thought people would be passing it around or like recommending it, or saying, "Hey Bryan, can you sign a copy and send it to my cousin in Missouri or whatever," because I never thought it would have any life beyond the show, which it did, and that's incredible. So I'm just so happy I was able to help people in some way.
What were you hoping that readers would get out of the book?
Yeah, early on, I'm telling you, it was very modest. I was just like, "Oh, this will entertain some people, and maybe got a few jokes in there, and maybe people won't hate it." And then as I'm writing it and nearing completion, it's the first time. This was 2014, I think, when I wrote the book. It was the first time I'd really put my journey, as it were, my cancer journey, into at least the first year, which was the most dramatic year, into context, into like one digestible story. And as I'm nearing the end, I'm like, it really was a crazy story. Like I lived it, and now it's behind me, and I'm glad to have it behind me. But reliving it, telling the story, and putting it into context, and realizing that there actually are people out there who would like to know more, like to hear the story, like would be inspired by it. God forbid. Like that ended up in a bit of a reverse engineering, when I completed the book and submitted it for editing and publishing. I was like, there really is a crazy story. I hope people take something away from this, and maybe you're inspired, or if they're facing a tough time or a tough diagnosis or whatever, they can be inspired to some degree.
Well, it sounds like it's done exactly that. Hey, Bryan, looking forward, your future, what are some of your future plans professionally and personally? What are you hoping to accomplish?
Well, I'm gonna have lunch here in a couple hours.
That's a good thing.
That's first on my to-do
Okay,
list.
all right.
I got a lot on the horizon, so I've been editing. I've been working on a documentary about comedy and cancer, humor and cancer,
Oh.
for God, it's been 5-6 years. It's a zero budget documentary. We're paying for everything ourselves, so things move at a snail's pace when you're not paying people. But we are paying people. Not very much, but we are paying people. But we're actually halfway through editing, which means I think that this will be a movie people can see next year in 2025. That's my goal, at the very least, to have it in film festivals by 2025. If it gets sold, and if a distributor decides whatever they want to do with it, that's their business. But very excited about to finally let people see what I've been working on for all these years. I do a lot of public speaking. It's really been a career that I didn't anticipate.
Yeah.
Some might claim that I should never be allowed near a microphone, and yet here we are. I did the keynote address at the American Brain Tumor Association last year, and I've spoken at companies and organizations that you would recognize, and it's been incredibly rewarding. And I love doing it, and it's fun, and it's funny. It's fun, but it's also a little bit nerve wracking, in the sense that I know. How do I explain this? In the sense that I know I'm going to be reliving some. I'm not to the point. I'm not to the point where I can robotically, recount all this stuff. I still relive it every time I talk about it. So to some degree, it's painful, but at the same time, it's cathartic, I guess, to know that I'm sharing the story. And a theme of the documentary And the theme of my life is, taking the worst thing that's happened to you, or maybe will ever happen to anyone, most people, and making something beautiful out of it, making something out of it that can be shared and that can be hopeful to some people.
That's nice. Have you ever done a TED Talk?
I have not.
Yeah, I think you'd be great.
Thanks.
It'd be cool to see you do one of those.
All right, Ted, listen up. Book me for
We got to get it. Let's get it. I'm your agent. Let's get that signed
Someone
up.
reach out to Ted.
Well, Bryan, it's been a true pleasure to have you. I so appreciate your message and your passion and the message of hope that you send out to people. I hope we here at the American Association for Cancer Research get the opportunity perhaps to meet you in person one day, and who knows, maybe you'll speak at one of our events and one of our activities. I think that would be awesome.
Oh, I'd be honored. Whatever I can do to be to say hi or to be a part of things or support in some way, I'm all in.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Again, been a great pleasure, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Mitch. Nice to talk to you.
All right, Bryan. Thank you, Bryan, for sharing your journey, humor, and insight with us today. Your story reminds us of the resilience and strength within each of us, and it underscores the importance of humor and connection in the face of adversity. We're grateful for the work you do to raise awareness and support for brain cancer research. To our listeners, thank you for joining us in this episode of the Believe in Progress podcast. If you're interested in Bryan's story, be sure to check out his memoir, Shrinkage, Manhood, Marriage, and the Tumor That Tried to Kill Me. For more information about the latest in cancer research and how you can support initiatives like these, please visit AACR.org. Your support helps us fund critical research and bring hope to cancer patients and their families. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode, and share this episode with friends and family. Together, we can drive progress in the fight against cancer. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep believing in progress and the power of resilience. This podcast is produced by CollegeCast LLC. And don't forget, cancer research saves lives.